Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Handyman in the field. Today we have, it'll probably be, when I say this of course, it'll probably be a little slightly shorter video, but I wanted to talk about the concept or the idea of what handyman means and why it may or may not benefit your business when you're deciding to come up with your name. For years before I owned my business and for years while I've owned my business, I've watched a lot of different YouTube videos, listened to podcasts, watched a ton of different types of content of the argument of whether or not you should call your business a handyman business or not. I can tell you that when I first started my business, I was very opposed to the idea of classifying my business as a handyman business. And the reason why was because my connotation that I have, or my perception of what the word handyman means, is not favorable. And I think that's because of how I've always viewed what a handyman is personally before I had my own business. Specifically, in the grand scheme of things, a handyman to me is always somebody who can do anything. But I've had a few situations where I've worked with people who they would call themselves handyman and they didn't have the best reputation, or I guess their reputation was good. And then once you start working with them, you have problems. A couple of years before I moved to my current home, I had a company come out, and there was two main companies that I typically used in my old house. There was one company, I'm not going to name the names, but there was one company where it was very clear how they ran their business. There was someone in the office and they had an office manager. The person who owned the business was typically in the office. They were the ones who would come out to do estimates, and they had 1099 subcontractors to come out and actually do estimates for smaller things, but they had people who specialize in certain areas. So if you needed something that was related to carpentry, they'd send somebody specific. If you needed drywall, they'd send a different guy. Every time you had a specific issue and you called them, they would send out that person. And they did have a guy who could do kind of a little of everything if you had a mix of different projects that you needed done, but that was the general idea. There was nothing wrong with this company. I honestly had no issues with this company. We hired them for a variety of different tasks over the years. And some of them were just things at the time that I was not confident in doing myself, or I wanted to make sure it looked good. And it was in a specific area where if I would have done it and it didn't look good, I was going to be upset with myself. One of them, just as an example, was we had a spot where there was a crawl space underneath a kind of like a dining room area on one part of our house, but it was very clear that the way the house was built, that was a direct spot where it was like it could have been an addition. It wasn't an addition, but it could have been an addition, or maybe it was an afterthought where it wasn't poured the same way as the original house. The crawl space was the only spot that had a crawl space was in this one space underneath this one room. And directly on the ceiling, there was a crack going down the middle. And before I knew anything about how to do any drywall repairs and things like that, I specifically tried to fix it. It didn't look good. So we called this company out. They sent out a guy who did drywall work, and he insisted on not just covering it up, but also fixing it. Great. That worked out perfectly because he wanted to make sure that it didn't keep happening in the future. I run my business exactly like that. I understand that some things are cosmetic, but they're caused by other things. If you go there for a leaky, a water spot on your ceiling, I could certainly take care of that. But how do we know that the spot wasn't, it's not still leaking, just not as much, or that bathroom hasn't been used as frequently and you don't know, and then you're paying someone double to do it, plus you're going to have to get it still repaired. So it's all about trying to give the customer the best value for the work that you're performing. That said, there was this company had a number of other things. I had some screens that needed to be replaced, and I didn't have the tools to do any of this stuff. There was underneath the kitchen sink, the wood had rotted out and needed to be replaced. And that guy, he did an amazing job. We eventually got to the point where we ended up finding out that company also did larger projects like kitchens and bathrooms. And we hired them to do the two the two main full baths that we had. We had two full baths upstairs. One just had a shower, and the other one had a bath, the bath and tub and shower. And for the most part, we didn't really have any issues. They asked us to buy a lot of the materials ahead of time, and then there was a certain level of materials that they had involved. We didn't have any issues with the price. We didn't have any issues at all, to be honest. Like, there was a couple of things that were more like cosmetic things that I think in the long run we probably should have said something about, but it wasn't anything where everything functioned properly, everything looked good. When we sold the house, we didn't have any complaints in regards to any of the things that we saw. It's just because I typically will notice things more than other people, you have to be aware of that. But we didn't have any issues with this company. On the flip side, we had another company come out who did some work for us right before we were about to sell the house, about a year before, where we had a half bath on the main floor that was a very ugly color. It had some cheap wainscoting put on, and we were concerned that because the wainscoting looked cheap, if we painted the room, which not on the wainscoting, but the other one, the up above, it would look bad. So we wanted to just get rid of the wainscoting completely, but we were concerned that there might be a lot of drywall work. So we had a company come out. Now, this company, again, for the most part, there was a slew of other things. There was a couple of other drywall repairs. There were some trim repairs from my dog chewing the windowsills in a couple of spots. Most of this stuff, again, was not stuff that I could necessarily take care of very easily without certain tools. And back then, my tools consisted of a corded circular saw and a drill. That's essentially all I had back then. I didn't have any of the stuff that I have now. And I knew my limitations. So we had this company come out. Everything that they did was perfect except for the one thing. When they went to go do the bathroom, they went in and pulled out the wainscoting and said that they didn't need to replace any of the drywall. It would save us a lot of time and money if they just, skimmed coated the areas that need to be skim coated and made the walls look good. Everything was fine with that idea, the idea of saving money. The problem was that they didn't seal off the room. It was a very small room, it was a very small space, and basically once they started, dust got everywhere, and I mean everywhere. To the point where when they were all set and done, the room looked good, but there was just dust everywhere, and we had to have a company come out and basically clean everything because of just how dirty it was. It wasn't a complaint that we raised to them, but it was something where it was just like the lack of concern that they had about everything else. Now, in my own business, I constantly am trying to come up with ways of not only giving the customer the best value, but also making sure that I look at from their point of view. If I walk in with a ladder that doesn't look great, I want to make sure that there's a drop cloth on the ground, because while I know that I'm not bringing in anything that's muddy or going to leave marks on their carpet, I don't want that scenario coming up in their head of, oh, they're putting this directly on my carpet. I wear shoe covers when I go in. I brought that up last time when I was talking about presenting yourself. But it's that idea of like, how can you give the customer the best value? Because the more value you give them, the less they're going to ask and question your pricing. And that's a big deal. So my perception of what a handyman was not a great perception when it came to starting my business. I didn't want to use the name handyman in my business. What I came to find out after the first year, so just as an idea, my business is called Blank Services. And the service aspect was in my mind, I could always adjust. It didn't have to be just blank handyman or blank cleaning or blank power washing. It could be a variety of different things if I use that word services, where down the line, if I wanted to spend the money on a, build out for a truck where I wanted to have a power washing, someone who had a truck that just goes and power washes and that's all they do, I could do that and it would still work under the same name. That is something that I'd like to do down the line, where I have more specialty build outs for vehicles that go out and do very specific work, because I think that there is a need for it. And I think that when you create a relationship with your customers, but also a trustworthy, loyal relationship with them, they know that they can trust you for these other things that they might be doing. A lot of my customers, they have home cleaners or services or cleaning services that clean their homes. I don't particularly want to clean somebody's home, but if I was to bring somebody on who had, experience cleaning and could offer that service, I'm sure I could get some customers, maybe not enough to have somebody on all the time, but if somebody wanted to start off, who already owned their own small business, but then worked for me, doing the work for my business for the customer, I get a little bit, they get the reaction or they get added customers, and it's a win-win for everybody. That's also the only way that I actually see the business growing. Where I'm at, there's a lot of handyman companies. None of them there's not any really super large ones, but there are a couple of companies that are relatively close in range where I know that there's a couple of vans that they have, or they have a couple of crews. It's not just, an owner-operator scenario like myself. But the idea is that those companies, they will only get bigger based off of their reputation. So the whole idea was I didn't want to stick with just the word handyman. Now, fast forward to about 2 years when I split my business from my business partners, or when I split the business from my business partners and I became the sole owner, I specifically started looking at it from a different perspective. How can I market the business? How can I get more customers? And the only way you could do that was by making sure that people could find you. I didn't have a lot of extra money on hand to be able to pay for advertising and things like that. And like I said before, I still don't pay any money for advertising. I have a website. I'm very proud of my website. I built it myself. And it works. I get plenty of people who find my website and find my Google business listing, and they're very content with what's there and what I have to offer. I can honestly tell you I haven't updated any of the photos on the website or the Google listing in probably at least 2 years, because I just didn't find the need to. I have before and after photos of different projects I've worked on. The website has pretty much any information you want to know is in there, but the idea is that we offer a variety of different things, but I realized that the website had to have something related to handyman, and the Google listing needed to say blank handyman services. So while the business name is still officially blank services, the important thing is that when I started, marketing myself and the business, it was blank handyman services. So under Google listings, it's blank handyman services. Under the website, the website is actually called blankhandyman.com, specifically because I wanted to make sure that was linked. Now down the line, I would probably go about the way of making sure that I have a separate website for services that then links to the handyman side if I start doing other forms of services, and just have the official name just be that, and then power washing or that cleaning, things like that, so that way it branches off and offers. The problem is that while I have all these great ideas, I don't have anybody working with me at the moment. I have a small crew that I can call if I have some bigger things or things that are outside my scope of what I typically do, specifically like tile work or like crown molding and things like that. I just don't do it enough to be able to be super talented with it, so I can rely on them. But the thing is, I would love to be able to find more people and be able to grow the business. But specifically for the handyman side of it, I didn't want that name. But I think that ultimately, depending on what area you are in, I think it matters. I think that based off of a lot of the different things I've learned, if you're in an area where there's not a lot of handymen, and the handymen that do exist are that kind of typical chuck in a truck, working an hourly rate kind of thing, they're not going to be the ones that you're gonna find online. You might find them on Facebook or something like that, but you're not gonna find them to have an official website, have an official Google listing. Someone searches for a handyman, they're gonna search on Google before they randomly start, combing through Facebook groups to find somebody. That's not to say that they won't, but they will look on Google first. If they don't have a lot of luck with someone picking up the phone or someone being able to return their calls and things like that, then they might go the route of, trying to find somebody through Facebook. In the grand scheme of things, that's how people will find you. They're going to, now, if you live in a more populated area, I've noticed that when you put handyman in there, you have to realize you're going to compete against larger companies, because those larger companies are already existing. They might already have 200 plus Google, reviews that are very high rated. You're going to have to compete. But the only way you can do that is by doing good work and getting customer reviews. My software that I use for my CRM, it is a program that every time I get done and I send them the invoice, they pay as soon as they get their receipt. I think it's either within a day they get another email that says, if you're happy with our work, please take a moment to leave us a review on Google, and then gives a link. It works out well. It doesn't always, not everybody's always going to leave a review, but most people, especially if they're very happy with your work, or you made them feel more than just a customer, meaning you went above and beyond, they feel like you respected their home and things like that, they'll probably leave you a review. I've had the luck of getting reviews. Now, to be fair, I'm not as busy as some people. I'm not as, my schedule's not as packed as other companies and things like that. But I would say most of my customers are return customers, so they don't really count when you're talking about, whether you get a new review for every single job that you do. That said, I would probably say that on a regular basis, the review ratio of like how many people actually leave reviews is probably like 20 to 30%. And that's even a hard number to even come up with specifically, because so many of my customers are existing customers and they've already either left a review or they're not the type of customer who does reviews. So that said, I think that, like I said, it's important for you to probably call it a handyman business if you're starting out, especially if you're going that route of getting a Google listing, potentially creating a website, things like that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the best thing to do is to create a web, or you go out there and create your own website. There are companies that can help you with that. That's not something that, like I said before, I had the luxury of being able to create my own website just from past experience with other projects that I've worked on. So that's a big deal. It saved me an insane amount of money building it myself. And it also made it a lot quicker, because I was able to basically build the entire website from scratch in about a week, which most places you're going to have to go back and forth with somebody. That's just something that I conveniently was able to do. Not by any means a professional website builder, although I have had people who have complimented me on my website and said, "Who did you have do your website?" When I tell them it was myself, they're stunned, because they think of me as the person underneath their sink fixing their leaky faucet, and not the person sitting in front of a computer making a website. So you have your little moments here or there, but the whole idea is call yourself a handyman unless you live in an area where it doesn't make a difference. You're going to have a leg up on people who are not going to put any time or effort into either having a website or have a Google listing. You're going to be able to be easier found that way. That's the important thing, because ultimately you're looking to get jobs, land jobs, and the way to do that is by making people be able to find you. If you don't want to spend money on advertising, that's the way to do it. To run a website, or to create a website, on a regular basis, you're talking like, the hosting company that I use along with the domain is like less than $150 a year. I did obviously have some initial costs related to creating the website. I did have to have somebody sign it, kind of the coding to get the website built before I could get, something put in there so that I could edit it. But you're probably, like, to be honest, you could probably get something put together for less than $500 if you're not going like a crazy professional route. If you want to be able to teach yourself how to do a website and things like that, there's certainly, sources of information out there for you to be able to find that stuff. And if you can, then it'll be beneficial for you. But that's the best option that I would say. Call yourself a handyman. Don't look down on that name, because while you will certainly be able to offer your customers other things outside the realm of what is typically known as a handyman, I think it's very important for you to establish yourself as a handyman first before you start growing yourself into something more than just, a guy who maybe does drywall repairs or minor repairs here or there, hangs pictures. I do a lot of other things that I didn't do 3 or 4 years ago, but when you're starting out, the important thing is to make sure that you can do what the things are that the people are wanting you to do. And that's how you associate the word handyman, is by things that a normal person can't do, but you have some skills that they don't have, and you can help get those things done. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. I'd love to hear what you guys would like to have topics in the future. I do have a list of things that I want to talk about, but I'd love to hear if there's something specific that you guys would like to hear. So please leave your comments in the comment section below. Subscribe the video, or like the video, subscribe to the channel. Always greatly appreciated for you guys taking a watch and giving me some feedback on what you guys would like to see in the future. With all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.